Is Russia running out of tanks? Interesting question. As before the war in Ukraine, Russia had the single largest tank army in the world, with over 12,000 main battle tanks of various types and vintages in active service or in storage, the majority, of course, being in storage. A seemingly endless number considering most modern militaries number their tanks in the hundreds. Yet, there are indications that that astronomical number may be reaching its limits, with recent footage appearing to show T-62M and MV vehicles being transported en masse from the enormous storage yards in Siberia, which in turn, according to recent drone footage, is starting to look a pinch depleted. Furthermore, the T-62 is quite far down the Russian armor totem pole, with only the Soviet Union's very first main battle tank, the T-55, being older. So if they are digging out the T-62s, that must surely be an indication that Russia is rapidly running out of MBTs, and are now scraping the bottom of the barrel before digging out the literal bottom made out of T-55s. Right? Well, I don't think the answer is quite so simple as just Russia is running out of tanks. Even with the most optimistic claims made by Ukraine itself, and by the way, never trust either side's claims in a war, then Russia has lost some 1,300 tanks. Massive, no doubt, but still only about half of the 2,600 tanks Russian sources claim to have in active formations. Mind you, only about half of that again, 1,200, were in 2020 thought to be modern tanks, that is T-72s and T-80s with upgrade packages. If this is true, though, why are we seeing T-62s being mobilized, and why this tank? In part, it is probably because Russia recently initiated a partial mobilization, whilst not calling it a mobilization, of course, in the classic Russian way. But the plan appears to be to raise 70 new battalions from reservist personnel. By the way, if you want to know what reservist, contract soldier, and conscripts mean, do have a look at my What Happens If Russia Mobilizes video. For now, all you need to know is that these men can be activated quickly, and 70 battalions would translate into, at max, another 200,000 personnel, which should, on paper at least, have previous military training and expertise. This limited mobilization is a sensible decision, really, very much in line with my own thoughts, though I would have gone for something a bit larger scale, as Russia does need more men, though their combat effectiveness remains to be proven. These 70 battalions will then be organized into so-called Battalion Tactical Groups, or BTGs, which is another subject I have done a full video on, but again, all you need to know for now is that these are combined arms formations that have tanks integrated into them. Thus, if Russia is to raise these formations, they are going to need to find a lot more tanks. They started the invasion with a little over 200,000 troops. They are now trying to bring that number again into combat, so they're probably looking for another 1,000 to 2,000 tanks, plus the replacing of already existing casualties. Now, those replacements do exist. If we accept the Russian claims that they had some 2,000 tanks in the field at the start of the war and lost 1,000, then there's still 11,000 tanks left, with 1,000 odd of them being in active service. But not all of these tanks are of equal quality. So let us have a super quick look at the MBTs sitting pretty in the Russian armory, starting with the oldest of them all, the T-55. This thing is damn near a World War II tank, with the earliest operational versions entering service in 1947. and for the time it was an excellent fighting vehicle, which was exported wildly and used and upgraded by dozens of nations all over the globe, even seeing active combat today in certain regions of the Middle East. It has also had some particularly funny conversions, like the Hurricane. This abomination is a firefighting vehicle which uses a jet engine from a MiG-21 to put out fires. Amusing though that might certainly be, the T-55 is hopelessly outdated by today's standard, and attempting to upgrade it to a useful level would cost more than it would pay. So if and when you see T-55s on trains to Ukraine, you can confidently say it is truly over. Then we have the spur for today's conversation, the T-62. Entering service in 1961, it was a significant upgrade on the T-55, though it was, many would say, also a pointless one, as it was almost immediately upstaged by the T-64 5 years later, and then the T-72 in 1973. A mere moment in tank development terms. Despite this, the T-62 is much better suited to the modern battlefield than the T-55, as it has received standardized and relatively effective upgrade packages that has been distributed to practically all of the T-62s currently in storage. That would be the M and the MV upgrades we can clearly see on the tanks being transported by rail. The M upgrade package was applied widely in the 1980s. It included extra armor plating, new tracks, shock absorbers, a new engine, and new radios, but most significantly, it provided a major offensive overhaul with a new stabilizer, firing computer, laser rangefinder, and night optics, along with reworked gunner and commander sights plus ATGM capabilities. A significant overhaul which more or less brought the T-62 in line with the 64 and the 72s of the time. And the MV upgrade variant applied later in the 80s also added Contact 1 era to the tank's front. The next entry in the Soviet arsenal was the T-64, which was in essence a bigger and better T-62. Well, in theory at least. The T-64 was, like so many Soviet designs, great on paper, but had a tragic tendency to spontaneously burst into flames. Literally. As engine fires was a big concern with the tank. It was one of those cursed military vehicles, where the designer's ambition far outpaced both his and the factory's ability to actually bring it into reality, and its constant need for high-level maintenance would make it a poor choice for rapidly raised formations. You then have the jewel in the Soviet tank crown, the T-72. By far the most numerous tank model both before and after the fall of the Soviet Union, the T-72 managed what the 62 and the 64 did not, to deliver superior performance in a more standardized and economical package. Better yet, its capabilities have been refined and upgraded in a rolling series of enhancements all the way up until 2016 with the introduction of the T-72B3M. In terms of ability and availability, it is probably the best of the current Russian armor. Even when compared to the modernized T-80BVM, which is comparable in terms of ability, slightly better, but available in far lesser numbers. And we are not even going to mention the T-14. That stupid thing has been almost ready now for half a decade, having been slated to enter mass production since 2020, then 2021, then 2022, and it still hasn't happened yet. And in all due likelihood, it never will happen, as the design will be forever forgotten as a project far beyond the actual technical capabilities of its creators. So, with the briefest of rundowns thus out of the way, why the T-62? Bearing in mind that we have only seen a couple of trains and no, as far as I'm aware anyways, hard confirmation of its presence in Ukraine, it could simply be a random movement of tanks. But more likely, the T-62 is being brought out of storage for two reasons. One, as a training vehicle. Those reservists, many of whom have not seen the inside of an army barracks for decades, will need quite the refresher course. And the T-62s are less precious than the more modern vehicles. Which brings us along to point number 2. The T-62 is not as good as the T-72 B3M. But most of the 62s in storage have already received their upgrade packages 40 years ago. And those few who have not will be much easier and cheaper to get up to relative standards than the T-72. As whilst there are thousands of 72s in storage, some claiming as many as 68,000, practically all of them will be older versions, as only a few hundred B3M modernization packages have been applied and installed each year. Worse still, the B3M requires a lot of modern components, many of which are imported components. Something Russia is no longer in a position to do. To put it simply, a T-62 is a horribly outdated tank, worse in damn near every way to a T-72 B3M, but the upgraded 62 can be dusted off and brought straight out of storage into combat, whilst the 72 will require extensive, time-consuming, and expensive upgrades. And what Russia has least of all right now is time, as top modern Western equipment of heavier and heavier types flood into Ukraine each and every day. If Putin wants his rapid, limited mobilization to be worth the impact on the economy and the impact on public morale, then it needs to lead to swift results. Better 2,000 shit tanks today than 100 okay tanks next year. You might also, by the way, be wondering, okay, but why not simply mobilize the T-72s anyways? If they are a better tank than the 62 and a newer model, surely they would perform better. Not really. Because here's the thing. We don't know exactly what kind of T-72s are in storage. It does have its own upgrade package applied in the 1980s, which is the T-72B. It included a new gun, stabilizers, sights, fire control, and all the usual fancy doodahs applied to the T-62. In other words, the 72B isn't a whole lot better than the modernized T-62, but the loss of a T-72B means you no longer have a vehicle that could potentially be upgraded to a B3M in the future, and the B3M upgrade package makes the T-72 a much superior vehicle. Losing the T-62s, who are, regardless at the end of their lifespan, will not impact Russia's overall tank strength over much. Losing a T-72, which can still be turned in to a fairly modern and effective tank, does. So, in conclusion, is Russia running out of tanks? Yes and no. There are still thousands upon thousands of tanks tucked away in enormous storage yards, including more recent models with the ability to be upgraded to modern-day equivalents. But they are running out of modern tanks. Well, modernized tanks at the very least. And the production of those upgrade packages are clearly not keeping up with demand. So Russia still has tanks, thousands and thousands of tanks. But whether or not they are worth anything on the modern battlefield, that is the question yet to be answered. Until next time, I have been Arch. Thank you all very much for watching, and I hope to see you all again soon. Till then, have a good day.